Perfect. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, How is Ignoring Extreme Weather Impacting Energy Security with Matiga Solutions and Duke Energy. I'm Charlie Davies. I'm a strategy manager at Matiga Solutions, and we're a Barcelona-based scale-up that use climate intelligence to help corporates, investors, and governments improve their resilience to the impacts of extreme weather and climate risk. And I'm joined here by our esteemed guest, from Duke Energy, Catherine. Catherine, would you be able to introduce yourself and maybe do a little intro on how you got into sustainability? Oh,
Yeah.
and prior to that, sorry, I just realised we've put a poll in the chat. So if everybody online can answer the poll and think about, what your biggest challenge is when it comes to assessing climate risk. Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's great to be with you, Charlie, and with our audience. I'm Catherine Neby. I have worked in sustainability for 25, 26 years at this point. I kind of fell into it in 2000, way back in the day, working on convincing everyday people to buy and install energy efficient equipment. We were working with utilities and nonprofits, manufacturers and retailers. So my career has kind of come full circle now that I'm over at Duke Energy. At Duke, I currently am our Chief Communications Officer. I've been in this seat for approximately 37 days, but just stepped away from being the Chief Sustainability Officer, where I had oversight of sustainability policy and philanthropy. And then briefly, kind of throughout my career, although it's been a bit of a winding circle, I spent some time at WWF, the pandas, not the wrestlers, if that makes any sense, leading a very large partnership with the Coca-Cola company. And then prior to Duke was at Walmart, working on sustainability issues, strategic initiatives, some support for the C-suite, and some international policy work. So long time believer in sustainability as strategy, and strategy as sustainability.
And a real mix of kind of companies in this kind of sustainability sphere. So I guess we sort of started on sustainability in general, but maybe kind of focusing on the topic at hand, extreme weather and climate resilience. Thinking about your entire career, is this something that you've always had to consider? And how has this kind of changed in prominence from, WWF, Walmart to Duke Energy?
Yeah. Well, climate, broadly speaking, is perhaps within the menu options of sustainability is the issue that is, I think, probably nearest and dearest to my heart. I have worked on it throughout my career, but I think from different aspects of it. And I will say this notion of resiliency is relatively new in the conversation. Certainly, if you've been working in the field for the last 5+ years, it feels like it's just part and parcel of it. But I recall relatively early in my tenure, there was this view that if you spoke to the private sector, if you spoke to companies about topics above and beyond mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions, getting all the way to net zero, if you introduce this concept of resiliency, that you were kind of abandoning hope on climate action. And I always thought that was incredibly short-sighted, and am delighted and also a little sad that we're at a place where we're needing to talk about both mitigation and resiliency. I would say when I was at WWF working with the Coca-Cola company, our partnership really keyed off of at a signature level water risk. And I think it's no mystery to this crowd that water is perhaps one of the ways that people will most keenly feel the impacts of climate change: too much or not enough water at the wrong time. And so was working with Coca-Cola and WWF on things like energy efficiency, water efficiency, sustainable agriculture, river basin conservation, but all of that really core to both kind of climate mitigation, but also I think the resiliency and adaptation that is so essential. And then at Walmart, their approach, which I really gravitated towards sustainability, was one of really democratizing access to a sustainable product so people didn't have to choose between a quote unquote good product and a quote unquote bad product. And one of their key initiatives, which I really adored at Walmart, was Project Gigaton. So working hand in glove with their vast supply chain, all of their suppliers, to think about all the different levers that could be leveraged to reduce overall emissions and really help a supply chain. You think of Walmart as being a very sophisticated company, and they are. But within their supply chain, even major suppliers really needing some assistance with what do we do? There's so much to take on in sustainability. And now at Duke, really looking at both how are we mitigating, reducing emissions, but also how are we making the energy system resilient for our customers and for our communities.
Yeah, no, and I guess it's, resilience from a number of different angles.
Yeah.
And so maybe focusing just on the energy sector now, what would you say the kind of unique challenges that extreme weather pose that are sort of unique to the energy sector?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll just take a few seconds at the top and explain a little bit who Duke is. So Duke Energy is one of the largest utilities in the United States. We're the largest, depending how you measure this. We're a vertically integrated utility, which means we control and lead generation, transmission, and distribution. So the full energy mix. And in the US, we have an obligation to serve everyone in our service territory. And do so in a way that represents the least cost or the prudent investment forward. We have, like most other US utilities, net zero aspirations, net zero by 2050, and we continue to trend towards our interim targets. Of course, in the US, energy right now is one of the top priorities, and we're thinking through how we maintain reliability, keep bills as low as possible, but also meet all of this load growth and economic development that is underway. And maybe just a plug for the industry itself, because I think sometimes this gets lost in a lot of discussions in sustainability. But the US utility sector is the one sector in the United States that's actually decarbonized. Overall, our sector is down 40% emissions, while most other sectors have either maintained, kind of flatlined their emissions, or raised their emissions. So I think we've shown tremendous progress in trying to find the right balance between reliability, affordability, and as we modernize our infrastructure, seeing attendant climate benefits. As I think about, such a broad question, Charlie, that you pose. But as I think about extreme weather and climate change and the energy sector, I might just start with kind of our core, which how we operate the system today. So I think perhaps one thing that may not be fully appreciated outside of the sector is that as you see more extreme temperature bands, warmer summers, hotter summers, kind of the Arctic blasts in the wintertime. We see customers obviously needing to run their air conditioning, need to run their heat kind of at more extreme levels for longer durations. And so needing to plan for a customer profile that's changing in terms of their energy use. I think another thing that's very interesting, and I would need an engineering degree in energy to articulate like exactly how this plays out, but also warmer weather, colder weather changes how we operate the equipment to produce energy and then to get it where it needs to go. And I think for an energy company, why this matters is because we are, I think, perhaps one of the only industries that's like in the moment we need to meet supply with demand. So we've got to make sure that when people need energy, that we're producing energy in that moment. And you've got some advantages with storage and things of that nature, but that we're able to meet that demand. And then also as people use energy differently, that we're able to be dynamic with how we respond. I also think about extreme weather in terms of customers and their expectations. I think one of the things I'm very sensitive to is during, and this predates my time at Duke, it was also true at my time at Walmart, when people experience storm, when their lives are disrupted, particularly those people who are personally less resilient, for a variety of reasons, primarily socioeconomically, as I think about it. When extreme weather hits them, they're more impacted than perhaps other folks. And so perhaps for you and me, if we were to lose power for a day and we have to replace our refrigerator with food, that would be, you know, no fun. But for a lot of other people, there's some real challenges there. And then I think about our customers that are operating manufacturing facilities, they've got to get their business up and running. And so any disruption is really a challenge for them. And then finally, when extreme weather happens, as we stage equipment and all of that kind of stuff, just needing to make sure we've got a supply chain that is prepared, so that we're thinking about as a hurricane perhaps comes, that we've got crews on the ground. We partner with our other utilities to make sure that we're preparing and that we've got that resilient supply chain moving so that we can restore and, if needed, rebuild in a really timely fashion.
Absolutely. So I guess it's that sort of obligation of sort of continuity in service on the sort of demand side, pressures on the demand side. So the profile of what customers are doing is changing, but at the same time, you've got very complex operational assets to manage and very complex supply chain in the upstream. So yeah, a whole range of different risks presenting, you know, challenges.
Yeah.
I read about sort of Duke being impacted by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Obviously, this is one sort of very specific catastrophic type of hazard, but maybe, you know, thinking about the whole range of like physical climate risks, what would you say the top three are to the energy sector?
Yeah, well, hurricanes are unfortunately something that we, in our service territories, so we're primarily North and South Carolina, Florida, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. So when it comes to those hurricanes in the Atlantic, we tend to be kind of first responders in some respects to those hurricanes. So that's certainly something that we've got a long history of being responsive to. We have actually done a couple of climate resiliency and adaptation studies. We published the most recent one this past fall, I think in the December 2024 timeframe. The first one looked at transmission and distribution climate risk in the Carolinas. The second one was a fulsome look at our generation, transmission, and distribution kind of across the system. And I will say they did cite some concerns affiliated with extreme flooding, kind of post-hurricane in Western North Carolina. And so while those impacts were severe, they were things that we had been looking at and had an opportunity to plan for, which is certainly always going to be helpful. I like to know what might be coming so that we can be responsive in a really prudent and time-sensitive fashion. So I would say that given our service territory, and I would expect anyone else on this webinar would kind of say the same, the impacts of climate change really do vary based on geography. But for our sector, I would flag extreme heat and flooding as being the two biggest risks that we need to plan for by 2050. And that's what the study really flagged for us and underscored for us. In addition, given warmer sea surface temperatures, and we're seeing that play out, those can increase, obviously, the intensity of some of these coastal storms like hurricanes and increase the amount of rainfall that they produce. And I will say Helene was the first hurricane we experienced that hit the entirety of our service territory with just one storm. So the scale of these storms is certainly increasing over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's that kind of differential impact of different hazards mean having to think about resilience in different ways. So you have these chronic heat
Yeah.
impacts, which will be very important for your operations, but then, an acute flooding event, could cause a major catastrophe and millions or millions in damages. So yeah, resilience is obviously a huge priority in that respect. So obviously Duke's a massive company, and I'm imagining that you're using climate risk intelligence in sort of various forms, stakeholder reporting, refinancing, due diligence for investments. But I think we're kind of here to talk about, how to be more resilient. So I'm wondering how do you sort of define resilience at Duke, and how do you measure this resilience? Have you ever been able to quantify specific improvements in resilience? Maybe talking about a specific project.
Yeah, I will say for Duke, it's been interesting for me coming on board. I've been at Duke for about 4.5 years, and I think the cool thing about Duke is we have been planning for resiliency forever. The energy system reliability is a top of mind concern and opportunity for us. And so we've been thinking through what are the impacts of severe weather for many, many years. We've been working with stakeholders, working with communities, working with other thought leaders to make sure that the system is available when people need energy. That's kind of the number one priority. I think the advantage of these two studies that we published was that they helped us think kind of comprehensively about the investments that we were making overall in the system, and helped us think through the prioritization of the investments and all of that kind of stuff. I think they have also been very helpful with external stakeholders who have legitimate and fair questions about how are we planning for that resilient future, whether or not there are investors, whether or not they're the folks that are helping provide the capital for the energy modernization ahead, whether or not they're insurers who are looking at our system. With respect to the studies themselves, rising temperature, extreme heat, cold, flooding, and wind are expected to create the greatest vulnerabilities for planning and operations of our system, specifically fuel supply and storage, reliability planning, capacity, and integrated resource planning and grid operations. And integrated resource planning, it's really how we're thinking about running and managing the system between now and 15 years in the future, give or take. And then asset management exhibits kind of the medium vulnerability to climate change. So adaptation risks include that we're taking include accelerated equipment aging, changing precipitation, flooding, heat patterns, and understanding of the transmission distribution system, poles, weather readiness, all of that sort of thing. One of the things that we have done over time, you asked about well, how has this helped? So much attention is paid in utilities on the generation side of the table. What are you building, and what does the emissions profile look like over time? I think one of the unsung heroes of the energy system is actually the grid, because it to some degree doesn't matter how much energy you produce over here or how much energy is demanded over here. If you can't get it from A to B, then it kind of, what are we doing here? And so we have spent the last decade plus really focused on modernizing that energy grid, making it smart so we can get power from A to B, noting that power is produced now, and given the variety of generation sources, it comes online at kind of different points, and it's demanded given the changing customer profile at different times. So really invested a lot of capital in making sure that is a resilient system, and it's a kind of a grid hardening system. In 2023, just to give you a kind of a scale, We invested more than $4 billion to harden and modernize the grid. It included moving some things underground so that when, obviously, when wind and trees and stuff move around, that those assets are underground and kind of safe from those impacts. Upgrading some of our poles to steel and concrete, particularly in coastal areas. And then that, what I call self-healing, that really kind of smart technology that says, aha, there's a problem, line here to here, I can reroute in seconds what historically would have required kind of a rebuild of infrastructure. In total, those investments in 2023 have helped to avoid nearly 550,000 customer outages. You think of 8 million customers, 550,000 customer outages is a significant portion of our customer base, and saved 7 million total hours of outage time across Hurricanes Debbie, Helene, and Milton.
Oh, wow. So again, this immediate sort of like, I guess, because we're talking about sort of climate risk, we're thinking that these are going to be, mitigating future losses. But even this investment has already provided returns in ensuring you have that continuity with customers. Yes. And, preventing outages, which is obviously, very catastrophic for businesses.
And it's important, Charlie, because I think for energy companies, utilities like ours, we're selling a product, but we're selling an invisible product. So people think of us when they get their bill, and they think of us when they go into a room and they click the light switch and it doesn't come on. They don't think, aha, Duke Energy when the light comes on. And so the customer experience really matters to us. And to some degree, we've been very privileged over years because we've taken the reliability of our assets so seriously that we're kind of an afterthought, except in moments of extreme weather, where people really, I think, appreciate how quickly we can get their power moving.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe thinking about, improving your climate risk resilience, how does Duke Energy sort of benefit from using extreme weather simulations and climate risk modeling? Like where does that part of the equation feature in the resilience approach?
So I think what is most helpful about kind of thinking about resiliency in this more comprehensive way is that it helps. So as a regulated utility, we have oversight by state utility commissions. So every investment we make in the energy system requires their support, their approval. And we need to make sure that all of the investments that we're making, because part of the obligation to serve is this oversight, we need to make sure that all of those investments are least cost or prudent. And so having a systematic study of how we need to plan for a resilient future helps us think through where do we make the targeted investments that are going to have kind of the best return. And again, because we've got oversight by these utility commissions, they need to give us the green light to move forward. And this is kind of, I think your question is one of the like classic questions in sustainability, and I'll kind of talk about it in two different ways. The first is going back to my Walmart days. There's this kind of origination story of a man, and this is probably stolen from somewhere else, but a man who is walking on a beach and it's after a storm and there are 1,000 starfish that have been washed ashore. And he's walking with a person. I'm probably getting this story wrong, so don't report me to the Walmart people, but he's wandering around the shore and there's all of these starfish everywhere, and he picks one up and he tosses it back into the ocean. And the question is, look at all these starfish. Like you've only saved one. And he's like, but it made a difference to that one starfish, right? Said it differently, the big question in sustainability is who pays how much and for what benefit. And so I think having this kind of comprehensive study better equips us to answer those questions, and I think that honest broker, transparent way.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And yeah, locating sort of exactly where to put your next $1 billion investment. Making sure that's future-proof from climate could be a good idea.
There's value in a data-driven analysis in helping to validate the choices that you are making, particularly when we're talking about billions of dollars.
Communicating with the regulators as well.
Yeah.
So I saw a stat somewhere, I think it's from the UNDRR, so the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. They said for every $1 invested in making infrastructure disaster resilient saves $4 in kind of repair and reconstruction. So in your experience, would you say certain types of resilience projects are more fruitful than others? And if we're sort of talking about, a return on investment, are the benefits realized at a sort of business level, or are they realized at a kind of system level?
I think the benefits are realized at both levels. I really struggled with how to kind of answer this question. As I was thinking about it, I guess as a utility, I look at the future. We're modernizing all of our equipment, which means we're having to replace very old assets, primarily coal assets, with new infrastructure. We build for some of our assets 60, 70, 100 years, which is, I think, a different timeline for planning than a lot of other folks. And we have this obligation to serve. So imagine planning a business to serve a community for 100 years, knowing how much change is unfolding year after year after year. And so the more data, the more analysis that we can have about what is likely to change and the degrees of planning that we need to do really, really matters. And then how do we think about sharing that information with those who have oversight of us and those who depend on us, our customers and the communities that we serve. So having the data to help inform how we're looking at the system today to make what is already on the ground resilient, and then how are we envisioning the energy system of the future. Oh, I don't know if you got a thumbs up, but I'm experimenting obviously with my iPad here. So anyway, so I think it's really important. I will say that the deployment of some of the more modern critical infrastructure that meets our customers' rapidly growing, rapidly evolving energy demands, while also reducing emissions, include things, some of the steps that we've been taking today, building new substations to updated design standards that consider flood risk. I will tell you, I was in Western North Carolina in the wake of Hurricane Helene, meeting with community partners, seeing the extent of the damage, and went to a substation that had just previously been upgraded and elevated for flooding risk. And I mean, you could see the storm damage, you could see the debris of the flooding came right up to the kind of the foot of that substation, but the substation was standing and was operating as it should. And so seeing those investments in real time, I think, is incredibly powerful. We've also been doing things like installing permanent flood protection at selected substations. Given that we have an obligation to serve everyone, we can't move to a different location necessarily. We've got to really look at hardening the infrastructure in place, undergrounding some of our most outage prone power lines, and again, leveraging the data so that we can really figure out which ones go underground and which ones don't. You can envision that that's a very important community and customer question, so grounding it in data, enhancing and further deploying a self-optimization grid or a distribution automation. In some areas, converting high voltage line sections in vulnerable areas from wooden to steel poles so that they're again, that harder infrastructure, and then increasing overhead distribution conductor ambient temperature assumptions. So that, again, that gets to, as we make assumptions for planning on what the energy system can produce and how we get energy from A to B, and as we have more extreme weather, kind of extreme temperatures, that changes that. So do we need to kind of update our standards relative to what we can expect in terms of capacity performance?
Crikey, so it's spinning a lot of plates and variables all at once, and then how to think, 2 years, 5 years, 100 years.
Yeah.
So game.
I joined Duke thinking like a utility was a bit like, okay. I mean, I was so excited to join Duke, but I was like, it's a very straightforward business. And then the more time I've spent in it, the more I'm like, oh, we're not playing checkers. This is multi-dimensional chess. So yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Just slightly conscious of time. Maybe we have one more question and we keep it ultra brief. So maybe for members of the audience, what would you say the key steps are to take in improving the resilience of an energy portfolio or investment? Like, what's your process?
I mean, I I I think the key step is to do the analysis and to take a real data-driven approach and look at what is kind of a business as usual assumption. So we're planning for that, but then also look at some of the tails so that you can be prepared for a perhaps more extreme scenario. I think I've only worked in sustainability and now communications for 30 days, but I think at least within corporate America, my experience has been there is a bias when dealing with things that feel uncertain and feel scary to not look. And because you're afraid of the answer. And I just 100% believe we need to ask the question, we need to get the data so that we can plan for it and keep an eye on values, keep an eye on customers, keep an eye on business continuity. I'd far rather have an answer, have it informed by data and work the problem than be surprised.
Absolutely. Yeah, at Natika, I think we often see people keen to bury their head in the sand, but I think that the sort of Murphy's law is far more useful. That everything that can go wrong will go wrong. So yeah, I think
And
that's adage for resilience.
well, and I think for a while, I think the climate science data was not certainly where it is today, which is incredibly mature, and the analysis that Matiga provides is very, very sophisticated. And so I think we now have really good climate science that can help a busy executive who doesn't know where to start. We now have the data and the technology to be able to analyze what you might expect, which is a great place to be.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we've got what 15 minutes. So I guess we'll have a look through some of the questions from the audience. So we start with Natalia Adler. So who holds ultimate responsibility for managing climate risks at Duke? Is it led by the sustainability team, or has it been integrated into the broader enterprise risk management framework?
That is such a great question, and it gives me great joy to say it is not the sustainability department that owns or controls the analysis and the conclusion. I would say at Duke, this was a CEO decision. So led from the top to look at the entire system. The analysis, the work was primarily led, we've reorged like everyone in corporate America, but primarily led by the chief risk officer, strategy office, and they sit within finance. And so when we stood up the analysis, I was one of the executive sponsors of the work among numerous other leaders, and the work at a technical level engaged multiple different departments. But really, because again, I believe sustainability is strategy and risk, and perhaps a longer term view. But I was really delighted at Duke to see that work led out of the strategy and the risk shop.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we see sort of risk and resilience heading. It's a business risk. It's not just a sustainability thing. It's fundamental to your core offering. So yeah, I think it should be from the top. Okay, moving on to, I think we've got two questions from Matt Williams. So first one, has there been any work done in the US on climate resilience metrics for energy networks?
Oh gosh, I don't know about specifically for climate risk and resiliency. But I will say, I go back to kind of our core business, which is providing reliable and affordable energy, and certainly have key metrics affiliated with reliability, are always looking at estimated times of restoration, and they could be a variety of causes for a loss of power, and all the way up to our executive compensation metrics are affiliated with kind of that overall reliability factor. But if you see one out there, let me know.
Fair. We'll get onto Matt to try and provide some new metrics for resilience then. And again, another one from Matt, a two-part question. Have Duke made any climate adaptation specific investments to increase their climate resilience of their assets? Which I think we've covered a little bit. And then if yes, how did you go about monetizing the benefits in building the business case, cost benefit analysis, for example?
I wouldn't say that we, I mean, I think I'm trying to figure out how to parse out that question in a way that is meaningful and helpful. So we have for years and years been making investments in hardening the grid. So we spoke about that, the $4 billion we spent in 2023, which predated, I think, either of our resiliency studies, to really look at helping to ensure that our grid had self-healing technology, and we were undergrounding things and things of that nature. So we've been doing that for a very long time. We have a process called integrated resource planning, generally speaking, across all of our service territories. And this is where we look at, again, that long-term view, looking 15 years in the future in most cases. We do these plans roughly every 3 years. It depends on the jurisdiction. But really kind of looking at what are the anticipated needs in terms of load growth, kind of community evolution, customer evolution, and then how are we getting from here to there, given the assets we have in place, the generation assets we have in place, and then given the kind of health of the grid. And so that is really where we do the full system planning, also looking at dimensions of resiliency to make sure that as we're making these multi-billion-dollar investments, that our regulators are giving us the thumbs up, because the regulators really do have final kind of, I guess, approval in where we move the business forward. So being very, very thoughtful of that. Where the resiliency study is going to be helpful, and we just concluded the full sum one, looking across our entire assets in December, where that will be helpful is informing future integrated resource planning, so that we make sure that we're taking into account flooding zones changing, how is extreme heat, for example, going to influence our capacity, and so how do we want to be thinking about planning for an energy system in the future. That iPad, it's doing something with the emoticons. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, and I guess it's one of those things. So, like, this is just a follow up from me, but like, does the regulator care about seeing the sort of like positive return on investment when you propose these resilience projects, or is it more about this money will help provide this continuity in service and prevent X outcome?
So I'm going to overly simplify our business, but because we have an obligation to serve, when we're making investments in the system, that is something that our customers end up paying for through rates. And so it's not necessarily a return on investment in the way you would think in kind of other sectors, and which is why it's so important that the regulator has full view and information into the steps that we're taking, because they approve those kind of investments, if you will. It's a different kind of calculus than a traditional kind of financial return.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess if anyone on the call is doing some good private sector return on investment calculations, please let us know. I think we've actually got time for maybe one question I skipped over, and it's sort of just very general. So what's next for Duke in terms of resilience? Like, do you have anything cool or interesting in the pipeline?
Gosh, well, maybe I'll take a little bit of a step back with the energy sector overall. So we always have something cool in the pipeline. I think as I look at this moment we're in as a company and perhaps as a sector, I mentioned at the start, the U.S. utility industry has already done so much to decarbonize. Our net emissions are down about 44%. The sectors are down about 40%. And yet we're at this moment where our business is needing to transform as we progress towards net zero. So we're now at a place where instead of changing some of the fuel mix to achieve some of those decarbonization benefits, we're now really needing to pivot as a company to a construction company. So we have to build a whole bunch of assets to replace these 60, 70-year-old assets. So in terms of our company itself, we're needing to transform what we do and how we do it. At that same time, there have been a lot of I'll use the word breathy, but a lot of breathy headlines about, oh my gosh, AI is coming and Bitcoin and economic development and things of that nature. And so there have been a lot of questions of how do you as a utility balance reliability, knowing you're going to have to build a bunch of new generation, and also think about all the other tactics you have from a capacity standpoint to meet the energy demand that's coming. How do you keep bills as low as possible? Because this is, we're basically building on an entirely new energy system. And then also, how do you think about balancing that with decarbonization benefits? I think the cool thing about being at this moment in time is that as we modernize our infrastructure, we will continue to see benefits for reliability, affordability, and also decarbonization. So I think it's a really, really exciting time. The other thing I would add that I personally think is cool is, having worked in sustainability a long time, some of these challenges, I think of deforestation, or I spent some time working on modern day slavery in the seafood chain. These are really hard things where the solution set, the technology, the information is not front and center, and how you're going to get all the way to a better place. With energy transition, the technologies are either here today or they're about 10 years out. And so I see the world where we get all the way to that net zero goal. Of course, crashing into all of that is extreme weather, climate change. And so how are we thinking about, as we're shifting to a construction company, as we're meeting all of this load growth, how are we making sure we're doing that in as resilient a way as possible? We're being thoughtful as we're making these 10, 20, 30, 100-year plans, so that we're doing it with that kind of science in place. And then you were asked about kind of what's cool. We've got some early site permits for some nuclear, which is exciting. We down in Florida have, I think, the only or the first gas plant that is built to run on 100% hydrogen. So we're testing that out. There's just a lot of cool stuff that's kind of happening in the sector right now that I'm just super, super thrilled by.
Yeah, it's an exciting place to be in. Many sort of very exciting and cool, interesting new developments happening. So yeah, watch this space. Perfect. So I think we're basically at time. I'll just say that the results of the poll are going to be emailed to everybody on the webinar, and so you can review them after the session. And yeah, massive thank you to Catherine for talking about the world of energy and resilience, and hopefully everybody online learned a few new things.
Yeah, Charlie, it was really fun. I enjoyed our conversation.
Great. Cheers.
Cheers.